Started early. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Inner Story. I am your host, Adrianne Hamilton Butler, and we are on WCEG right now, the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group. You are watching us, hopefully, either on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and now on Roku. Tells you how much I know about certain things, right? As well as WCEG I'm sitting here in Atlanta, actually Sandy Springs, looking out my window, hoping for a few flurries. I don't see any yet, but what I do know is it's cold outside. So I'm hoping that you all are staying warm and that you have a mug of warm something. I've got a mug of coffee here. What about you, Reverend Kenya?
I have one
And
as
Reverend
well.
Kenya, my amazing guest today, Reverend Kenya Thompson, has her mug of coffee as well. I want to just tell you a little bit about Inner Story. This is my second episode, and a lot of y'all who have been following me know that this used to be Onward. But I was telling Reverend Kenya earlier today that I changed it up a little bit, and I changed it up because last year I became a grandma. Actually, I'm getting ready to be a grandma again, so I'm loving that. But also, this year is a huge birthday. I'm turning 60 in a month, and I realized that as a near 60-year-old woman, that I've lived a long life, and that there are women over 50 who have a lot to share. We have a voice. We've experienced a lot. Our journeys, while different, are universal in that we have wisdom that we've earned over things that have happened, that we have survived and thrived, that we are now feeling a sense of peace in the alignment of our purpose. But we also know that there's more to come, that just because we're over 50, it's not over. And so this show is to give us just a moment where we as women can just have a conversation, those of us over 50, to talk about what led us to this point and where we see ourselves going forward. Just sit back with us, relax. This is going to be a great show because of the topic that we're going to be talking about today. Reverend Kenya Thompson is the vicar of Church of the Common Ground. I came across Church of the Common Ground because I wanted to do some volunteering. I'm also kind of diving in a little deeper into my Episcopal roots. And so I found Church of the Common Ground, which meets weekly at Woodruff Park. And Reverend Kenya is there with others leading an amazing church without walls. And so first, Reverend Kenya, I want to say thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Adrian, for having me. I appreciate, this opportunity, to sit down for this discussion about women and where we've been and where we're going. And then also about Church of Common Ground. Ours is a unique ministry, which this year will celebrate our 20th year. Um, Worshiping at Woodruff Park, our first worship service was held on Christmas Eve in 2006.
And so, Reverend Kenya, we talked a little bit this week. Last week we had some really crazy cold weather. And you were saying to me that that was only the second time in 20 years that you all did not hold service, which is amazing to me, given that the service is outside.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the Church of the Common Ground, how it got started, and how you're worshiping with our neighbors who are unhoused.
Sure. So in 2006, Bob and Holly Book, it came from their inspiration, and their idea was we really need to meet people where they are. Often we are kind and we are gracious and we invite unsheltered people into our communities, and they thought, hey, let's be that pastoral presence, that presence of hope and community right there where folks are. And so that's what has inspired our 20 years. We do worship, despite weather conditions. Um, I'm sure there was a Sunday over the past 20 years. It may have been a little tenuous for us to be out there, but nonetheless, we really know that for some people, that is their connection. That is where they find community. And, we believe if they can live outside, then, then we can be outside every Sunday, for an hour and a half, again, unless it is, dangerous for the entire
Right,
community to be there.
right. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing as the needs for the folks that are out there that you're worshiping with, both kind of their faith needs, but also their physical needs.
Mhm. Yes, I think, and I'll start with the faith needs because I think really that is where it all begins. The need for hope, right? Everyone needs to have
Yes.
hope to keep us maintaining, to keep us going. Hope can look like someone sharing a cup of coffee and having a conversation with someone who has not had a conversation because, it's not often that people strike up a conversation with our unsheltered brothers and sisters. Hope can look like a prayer circle where we ask, we say that all prayers are welcome. And hope can just look like having a community to go to. In terms of, the physical needs, they are immense. Just to be candid, obviously housing is
Yes.
a huge need. We have a partnership with an organization in town ministries, and so we have been able to lead people over 150 people towards housing over the past 3 years because housing first is really essential. It takes
Yes.
stability before people can really reap the benefits of nutrition, of education, of job training programs, even in terms of just getting their health together. And so we really work hard towards that. But in the interim, self-sustaining, non-perishable meal kits are
Mm.
are important for those folks who don't have access to stoves and refrigeration. During this season, gloves and neck warmers and hats are also crucial. And then, of course, socks, because we offer a weekly
Yes.
foot clinic where we take care of people's feet.
Okay. So, can you tell us how people can get involved with the Church of the Common Ground? I know that folks can donate items, they can donate funds, they can actually come out and worship with you and volunteer. So, how do people get involved, Reverend Kenya?
Sure. I think the best way to get involved is to go to our website and under the team, under the team section, my email is listed, as well
Okay.
as the email of our COO, our chief operating officer, and you can email either one of us and we could talk with you about some more hands-on opportunities. Typically, we do need volunteers for our Tuesday foot clinic.
Okay.
You don't necessarily, you don't have to be a professional in terms of a pedicure, but there are other
Yes.
roles that one can play. Your group or organization can sign up to donate our lunches on every Sunday, and we have a
Okay.
sign up genius available for that.
Great, great. That's awesome. And thank you so much for all of the work that you do related to Church of the Common Ground. And again, it's www.churchofthecommon ground. Or you can follow them on what, Facebook, Instagram,
Yes.
LinkedIn. Okay, great. Thank you. And now let's talk a little bit about you. We had a chance to we've had a chance to talk a little bit. And we talked about your involvement with the Church of the Common Ground, but it was a little bit of a journey because you did not start out in ministry.
No,
You
I did
you
not.
actually started out in the school system.
Yes, I did. I come from a family of educators and typical, a young person, an 18-year-old, I wanted to go the opposite way. And I would think, hey, I'll never be in a school. But as our creator would have it, I actually did wind up in education after receiving my master's from American. and having graduated from Howard, I entered into an educational administration program, and I found myself working in admissions and college recruitment um,
Yes.
initially. And from there, I moved over to high school and college guidance. And that was such a joy and such a wonderful call to be with young people. I loved working in a school. I was particularly drawn towards families who did not have the resources for college, the first in their family to go to college. And sort of that was a call and a mission in and of itself, because I really strongly believe that all students deserve to go to college or fulfill whatever dreams they have after high school. And they deserve quality support and guidance,
Yes.
regardless of socioeconomics. And I've just always been drawn to folks who typically might be forgotten and left out of, whatever system is in place. And so at some point, I felt a strong pull or a nudge to do more. And it's funny. That's the only way I can describe it. Like it wasn't a burning bush type of scenario as happened in the Bible, but it was sort of this nagging to do more. And it took me a while to discern, what that more looked like. But after some time and connecting with some women that I actually knew in ministry, it was clear that I was called to lead in God's church. And that's sort of where my pursuit of the priesthood
Yes.
began.
But in our conversation, you talked a little bit about growing up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and you talked about your family and how your family really took the time to reach out to people in the community, folks who may not have had a lot. And so you were exposed to that early. Tell me about the impact of seeing your family do outreach in their community. How did that shape your thinking and your desire to help others?
Yeah, it is it's the kind of thing that when it's happening, you don't really realize what it is. And so, my grandmother was a teacher, and I would see her tutoring students after school, without, of course, being paid for it. I would see my grandfather delivering groceries. I would see, my mom inviting over, one or two people from the neighborhood that didn't necessarily, have dinner. And so it didn't dawn on me at the time, but somehow I was taking all of that in, and I
Mm,
recognized that it's not just about the individual, but it is about the community. And
yes.
it is about not judging people. I recall when I was a little girl, so walking down the street with my mom, and there was a gentleman on the corner, and obviously had been drinking and in such a stupor, and I called him a name. And I
Mm,
called him a bum.
oh,
I didn't get spankings often, but that's one time when I did. And it was just that message of, this person is human,
right,
and we really don't know, and even if he is, it's just not a good or a nice or a kind thing to label people. And so it was really stilled upon me um, growing up, that again,
right.
helping, being kind, connecting, and not judging is something that's just really important.
Exactly. And even as a counselor, I'm sure that you encountered many students who came from diverse backgrounds, but some who really needed emotional help, help with basic needs. How did that shape your thinking as well? Because I think, in our conversation, you talked about how there were students that really wanted to go to college, but didn't see that as a reality for them. So, how did that also shape your desire to do something broader, to really be in the midst of people who we consider forgotten?
Right. Yeah, and that's a great question because, as a guidance counselor, as a college counselor, you really are a lot focused on results, which is getting the student into
Yeah.
school, and that's wonderful. But then I also recognize that there's a certain amount of faith and hope that has to come along with that, right? You have to
Yes.
not just have faith that the admissions process is going to work for you, or if you fill out financial aid papers, you're going to get funding for your education. But you also have to have that faith that ultimately our Creator, that God has a plan for each and every one of us, and that plan is one that doesn't include suffering. That plan is one of abundance, and so even a kid who comes from a family who doesn't have the financial means or is in a certain ethnic group, they deserve those opportunities as well. And so how can I have an impact on a larger basis in terms of helping people to remain faithful and hopeful, even
Yes.
when the world says, all of the chips are stacked against someone.
Yes.
How can I lead community where people have some place to go to understand and to know and be confident that they belong and that they are loved and that they're deserving of love. And they are deserving of, the blessings that education and housing can provide.
I I love that you said that because I think that's at the core of so much suffering is that people don't feel loved. They feel as though they are overlooked and that they don't have a voice. I think, of course, having a physical need is one thing, but an emotional need is very difficult to overcome when people are looking over you or through you rather than walking alongside you. We talked about your call to ministry, and you're an Episcopal priest. And I asked you, I said, what led you to become an Episcopal priest? And you talked about growing up Presbyterian, but you said that something happened that led you to the Episcopal denomination. It's actually a really great story. So let's talk a little bit about what led to that conversion for you.
Yes, and it's interesting. I suppose like many college students, when I was in college, I did not attend church regularly. Matter of fact, I was accused of being a stay-home Baptist. Um, but when I graduated from Howard, I really felt the need for a community. And
Yeah.
just so happens, I interviewed for a position working with a program at the time that was sponsored by the Children's Defense Fund, and it was a program in DC public schools, and I got the position. And my supervisor invited me to volunteer on Saturdays at their pancake breakfast for the community. It's a community right around Howard University at St. George's Episcopal Church. And this kitchen was called Kwanzaa Kitchen, modeled after the Black Panthers breakfast. And
Yes.
I started going to that about a month in. He said, "Hey, why don't you join us on Sundays?" I'd never attended an Episcopal church in my entire life, so I had to look that up. And I joined on Sunday, and I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by the welcome. I was a little hesitant to accept the invitation, but I did. But they made me feel right at home, and it was clear there was a lot of love in that place. And it was
Yes.
also clear that this small church did so much for the community that they were a part of. They were out there, they invited people in, and I was just impressed by all of the different ministries that they offered. And what was most interesting about this, and I always tell folks, please invite people to church. The person that
Yes.
invited me to church is our now bishop of the Episcopal Church here in Atlanta, which is the very Reverend Bishop Robert Wright. And
Yes.
so that it's more than a coincidence. We actually went to attended Howard University together as well. But that just goes to show you how God works and how life can work. And you
Exactly.
don't even know that it's working. But I think, the
Right.
importance in that is that, it doesn't take 1,000 people to do good and to do the right thing.
Mm,
Sometimes it can be the smallest group of committed individuals that make
exactly.
the largest impact, which is where my love of the Episcopal Church came from, and my decision to make that conversion. Um,
Yes.
Although, I really Don't get bogged too much in denominational differences, because I think that
Yes.
we're all here to love and care for each other. And our denominations are how we express that love.
So, as an African American woman in the Episcopal Church, how do you see your place in helping not just the Episcopal Church, but the church in general to become more engaged, more boots on the ground with people who are suffering? Again, when I look at Church of the Common Ground, that's what you're doing, but that's really not the norm. We don't have a lot of Church of the Common Grounds around. So how do you use your voice, your position to help the church to see the needs of people and to be more engaged?
Mhm. Yes, I think, I 20 years ago, you probably could not have told me that I would be doing what I am doing now. And I say that to mean that, we as women, particularly as African American women, we should not limit our compassion. We should not limit that gut feeling that says, this is what we need to do, or this is what we need to start doing for our community and for the community at large. And
Right.
so, unintentionally, I think I am in a place to, to set an example, right? That says, don't be limited by what the world says you can and cannot do.
Mhm.
Don't conform. I remember when I was in a period of discernment, I leaned into a scripture from Romans, the 12th chapter, that says, "Don't conform to the patterns of this world." So
Yes.
the world might say, "No, you can't do that. Your work is not important. It's not going to help anybody. You're just going to make a dent in terms of the suffering." But God says something different, right? And we have to
Right.
allow that to transform our lives so we can transform other people's lives. And, I
I
hope
love that.
that, young women, particularly African American young women, but young women in general can sort of look at me and women like me and say, hey, I can do this. I can do this and I can
Right.
live a life of love and care. I can have financial security. I can have a social life. I can have a family. I can do all of those things and help the least of these at the same time.
And I love that you said that because actually in my mind, Reverend Kenya, it takes a little bit of courage to go this route. And what I mean by courage is you said something about, sometimes we think that when we dedicate ourselves to helping the least of these, that we're going to miss something. We're going to miss out on perhaps some type of material security, that we will miss out on other types of relationships because this is hard work. It's hard work. And so, how do we let young people know that there is a benefit to being engaged in the community? It's different work. You started out as a teacher. I started out as an accountant. And here we find ourselves in the trenches, doing work that benefits people who are suffering or in need. And so, how do we talk to young people about making that transition? I mean, things are expensive. We want to have fun. And how do we talk to them about the benefit of doing this kind of work?
Hmm. Yes, and I think that is a challenge. I remember being, in my role as high school guidance counselor, and we often talk more about the careers that will that have more financial gain. The doctors, the
Yes,
lawyers, the actors, the engineers, et cetera. And those are wonderful professions. And you can be in those professions and you can give and contribute in a special way. Right.
yes,
But what I would always encourage my students and families is to think about um, what meets the needs of the world and also can bring your heart joy, right?
yes.
But I think those are two very important things, and it is indeed and I realize also it's a privilege to work in a vocation or a career that you really love. because there are some folks that they don't necessarily love their work, but they do it every day
Right.
because it serves a specific function. But it
Right.
really is, each and every one of us, and I will tell young people this, should find something that they enjoy and or they are satisfied in doing. And it might
Mhm.
look like direct service types of careers, whether it be nursing or policing or counseling, and it might look like something else. And then they can figure out, how can I be hands-on? How can I volunteer? How can I be a mentor? Right? There are all
Yes.
ways that each of us can contribute. And I certainly, understand, higher education is expensive. Vocational school is expensive. So I understand making those investments and the importance of, hey, I really do need to have a stable income. I need to support myself. I need to help support my family. Um, but I think there is a way to do that. And that as long as you like what you're doing, that the finances around that will materialize in a lot of different ways. It may not look like your typical, 9 to 5 career.
Yes. Right. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I want to talk a little bit, going back to Church of the Common Ground and working with the unsheltered. We talked a little bit about who you all serve
Mhm.
on Sundays and throughout the week. And while you see mostly men, we do know that there unfortunately is a large number of women experiencing homelessness, and also families led by women experiencing homelessness. Let's talk a little bit about the women, because I think a lot of times they get forgotten in this story. They get forgotten because we don't see them often standing on the corners or sleeping outside. And a lot of it is not because they're not present, it's because of the vulnerability of women. And so they tend to be in places where they feel safe. But let's talk a little bit about what you have seen and what you have experienced with women who were unhoused.
Mhm. And that's something important to think about, because I think because of their vulnerability, as you mentioned, women do make an effort to be as invisible as possible, just to keep
Yes,
their heads down, to go about their business, to get the things that they need so they won't be targets. And so there's this
right.
added layer of insecurity. Um,
Yes.
One thing I think I've seen across the years is there are so many different reasons that women end up homeless and living on the streets. Everything from, domestic violence, and escaping from those types of situations. I've seen women who, age out of the foster care system. And so, they can know, they don't have any means for education. I mean, obviously, I've seen women with mental health issues, and anything from severe anxiety, depression, other things that have gone untreated. Um,
Yes.
Women who live, who are unsheltered, they also don't have access to adequate, or even basic health care. So all the different exams that we as women need to have on a regular basis, they don't have, right? So,
Right.
we have seen women on the street who are dealing with or in the midst of literally, radiation, treatment for breast
Mm,
cancer. And so it's a really, really tenuous situation, and the care of women and the care that they need is quite extensive. And so when we do encounter women, we make, I think, additional effort to really find out their needs and connect them with the appropriate resources that can support them. We also, we see women who have spent time incarcerated. And like most folks
yes.
that are incarcerated, there's not a clear
Yes.
plan of support and assistance. And so again, that adds another dynamic in terms of getting them stability in some type of shelter situation and then moving them on to self-sufficiency. I think we take for granted, sort of what folks with resources, what women with resources have access to. And our sisters without resources do not have access to. If, if
Exactly.
you can just imagine perimenopause and menopause, for example,
Right.
or someone with resources, that's a very challenging time in a lot of different ways, physically, emotionally. But for those without resources, it's even harder. And so we just, have
Mhm.
that extra, pay that extra care, take care of they have many spiritual needs. A lot of women and men, but women in particular, have grown up with specific ideas about their own self-worth and value from, some of the stories that they've heard about women in the Bible. Eve was
Yes.
responsible for the downfall. And so when you
Yes.
grow up with these types of ideas and where you see women in religion and in the Bible sort of being portrayed as, the nemesis or responsible for the downfall, or the adulteress, etc., it doesn't really foster a good and healthy sense of self and the value for us as women in our current, in our current society.
And so, didn't you share with me, Reverend Kenya, that you actually will be doing a study that will be helping women, I think, to see more of themselves in the Bible and the strength of women in the Bible. Do I have that correct? I
Correct.
think yes. Yeah.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about that and why you think that's important for women to understand their place in the sacred text.
hmm Yeah, so I was inspired years ago. I read a book called Bad Girls of the Bible. And so it
Oh,
highlighted all of
nice.
these women who historically have been portrayed as bad. So, so Lot's wife, Eve, um, and so I thought it was, important for women to see themselves reflected accurately, right, in terms of the biblical text, in terms of that history, right? And
Yes.
so because what we have the tendency to do is we sort of put, sort of men on a pedestal in the Bible. And for women, maybe not so much. They were
Right.
always, we were always doing the wrong things. And I think it really does shape what we think and feel about ourselves, and even just the roles that we can play in our own communities.
Mm.
Mary Magdalene, she's the one that announced the resurrection. And
Yes.
she doesn't often get credited with that out loud. The men really didn't want to didn't want to believe it, right? And
Right.
so and we also have, women in the unsheltered community that have been sex workers, and have experienced, sexual abuse and the like. And so it's even more important for them to see themselves in a positive light, for them to know and understand how much they contributed to, to a text that shapes us as a community, that shapes our spirituality. They
Yes.
need to see their light, and they need to see their light started shining centuries ago, and it continues to shine. And our leadership, right? We were leaders thousands of years ago, and we're leaders
Yes.
now. We're leaders in our community,
Yes.
we're leaders in our homes, we're leaders in the workplace. And we should be acknowledged for that. And we should feel confident and feel inspired by that, from the earliest women, and take heed, to their example.
I love that. And that kind of segues into how I want to spend, the last part of our conversation. And that is really talking about where we as women play a role in leadership. And what I mean is community leadership. We're living in a time of, for some, it's a time of upheaval. It's a time of not really understanding what's next. A lot of people are afraid. A lot of people are struggling, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They don't even know where the church is at this point because they feel that the church is not concerned about the needs of common people. A lot of times I've heard some women say, I really don't want to be engaged or involved. in what's going on. I'm trying to live my life, and I totally respect that and understand it. But for women who want to be involved in helping others to find hope, how do we do that when there is fear of retribution, when we feel that our voices are being ignored? How do women who want to be involved in the struggle that is going on in our society right now, how do we do that in a safe way? And how do we even bring our collective voices in a way where we can support each other? Because so many of us feel that right now we don't have a voice, that we can't speak about our fears. So it's a long way of saying two things. One is, how do we find comfort and encouragement and support with each other as women? And two, for those of us who are interested, how are we able to engage in lifting up the community, especially when there's so much fear?
Um, yeah, that's so when I think about, times such as these that we're living in, what stands out to me is that there's a lot of suffering that's being ignored, right? And that's
Yes,
very disheartening and it's very troubling. And there are a lot of attempts to sort of divide us, right? And
yes,
sort of encourage us to sort of blame each other and blame particular groups for particular things. Again, and none of which, is healthy or are good or are okay. And so I think that, a few things in terms of how can we as women, how can we find the strength and the courage and the motivation within ourselves, right? So we
yes,
are on good grounding and footing because you can't fill from an empty pitcher. And so I
right,
think that the first thing that one of the things that we need to do is we need to we need to give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves, however that might look, whether it is rest, whether it is a retreat, whether it is spending time alone. We have to carve that out, and we have to not feel guilty about that. Because as you
right.
know, as leaders in our homes and communities, we're pulled in a lot of different ways. Um, and even in terms of gathering small groups together. So we do have that self space to talk about our
Mm-hmm.
fears with women who will understand our common fears and not be dismissive of those fears, right?
I
Because
love that.
sometimes
I love that.
when we get in particular groups, we don't want to share because we don't want to be
Right,
dismissed and we don't want people to say, hey, just get over it. It's going to pass tomorrow.
right.
Um, because I do believe that faith and fear can exist in the same space, but we just can't
Yes,
let that fear immobilize us. And so by getting
right.
together and sharing some of our common anxieties, we become more powerful to step into the fear and to realize that we can walk through that fear with support of our sisters, but also with the support of God. And I think that's a
Yes,
very important piece of that. Um, and then the second part of, how do I get involved? Like, what can I do? My voice is not going to make
yes,
a difference, whatsoever. Um, and so here's the thing, our voices are different. Some of
yes,
our voices are loud, they're front and center, they're out there, they're booming, they take over the microphone. And those voices are okay, right? And that is one
yes,
type of leadership. But then there's this other type of leadership. There are other voices who might not be out front. They might be
yes.
that subtle, that voice of calm, right? That's more in the
Mm,
background, right? Because we don't lead in the same way. And that's something that I had to learn over the course of years that everyone's leadership looks different. And so
yes.
we need the big voices that are out front. We need the voices that are behind the scenes that are mentoring other young women that are taking it upon themselves to, take someone, maybe you take an unsheltered person that you met at Common Ground on a Sunday for a cup of coffee, right? All
Mm,
of these little things matter. right? It's
Right.
not always one big thing.
Right.
Maybe, our group couldn't buy 200 pair of shoes, but maybe I can take the time to come down and pray with Common Ground or another group on a Monday and just strike up a conversation, right? And sort of build relationships um, with other women in particular who may
Yes.
need that type of support. And so we all have a place, and if everybody does something, right, it will amount to a big thing, right? But
Yes.
if we only focus on, everybody is not going to be out protesting in a large group setting for a number of reasons. Everybody
Right.
is not going to feel comfortable necessarily speaking in front of a large group. But there's
Right.
plenty of other ways that we can be very impactful using our own gifts and talents that we've been given. We just have to really discern and think about how we can do that.
I love that and appreciate what you said, because I think you're right that it really is taking the time to discern what is your place and how can your skills be best used to serve others. And I think a lot of times we do see people who are willing to be out front, and that's great, but God may have other intentions for us. And so it really is being intentional about seeking your place and helping others. So thank you for sharing that. So, as we've got probably about another 15 minutes, you and I talked a little bit about lessons learned. And I think that as we approach the second half of our life, we start to reflect more on the lessons learned. Tell me a little bit about the lessons that you've learned, Reverend Kenya, as you've journeyed this life, and how those lessons have really impacted you as you're looking forward.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons that I've learned over the years is around the assumptions that we make, about other people, about our
Mm,
fellow siblings that we exist with on this earth. And I think that it's an important lesson because, often, we assume certain things about people just based on superficial things, right? What we've
yes,
seen, what we've heard. And the thing about assumptions is that although, they may be true some of the time, they typically don't tell the complete story. And
right.
so, and I remember I took a dismantling racism course years ago, and they talked about the power of assumptions. And an example
Yes,
was given of, you see someone, you see them walking down the street, they're dressed in fine clothing, they get out of a fancy car. So you assume that they've had this very privileged and charmed existence, when in fact, the opposite is true. Or you see somebody in a food pantry line and they drive up in a luxury vehicle and you assume that, they're rich and they're trying to take away from poor people when maybe they
yes,
borrowed the car, from a relative. And I think that's important because assumptions shape how we engage with people and
yes,
how we react to people. Assumptions shape relationships, personal relationships, relationships in the workplace, relationships where we volunteer.
yes,
And it's hard to get away from that because it's kind of easy for us to assume as opposed to really taking the time to get to know people and to ask
yes,
questions and to strike up conversations and develop relationships that may not be easy relationships, and there may be difficult
yes,
conversations, but assumptions can be very damaging. And so I've learned over the years, instead of assuming the worst about people, to assume the best. And if there are any questions, just to ask them.
yes,
And it really opens up a certain place of connection and a place of relationship that can be very powerful. in each of our lives. You'd be surprised about, some of the assumptions that we make that are very different. And we also find out how much we have in common, uh, with
Absolutely.
folks.
Yes.
And so I think
Yes.
that's, of many lessons, that's one of the larger lessons that I've learned over the years. And I think second to that is to kind of follow our gut. I think there is a still small voice in all of us. And oftentimes that voice is told to kind of be quiet. And I think that sometimes if, we are pulled in particular ways and we don't go in those ways because, society tells us, no, maybe you shouldn't do that. It's too much of a risk.
Mm.
So, you want to sort of stay in this narrow lane, so maybe you have an idea about mentoring young women, and you can't quite figure out how to do it, or you talk to a friend and they say, well, that's really going to be a hassle. It's going to take too much time and you'll never get to. And sometimes we have to focus on and trust the inward voice. Right. And
Yes.
we
Yes.
kind of have to put our earplugs in and not necessarily seek opinions of the outward voices, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, because we know ourselves better than anyone else. And so we
Yes.
have to give ourselves that leeway to listen
Yes.
what's inside and really what God is likely putting inside us in terms of moving us, in a particular direction. Because I think had I trusted myself a bit more early on, I may have taken more risks. I didn't travel outside of this country, and I don't include Cancun until I was 40. Oh wow, 41 years old.
Okay.
And I traveled to China and lived there for 2 years. And again, but it was really about being afraid of taking a risk.
Yes. Yes. And so, as you think about Reverend Kenya today and 18-year-old Kenya, what are some of the differences? Tell me a little bit about 18-year-old Kenya and how she morphed into who you are today.
Yeah, it's funny. Um, I feel 18 in a lot of ways in terms of just being in a place in my life where I'm very drawn to adventure, I think.
Mm.
And I'm in a place where I can take risks because,
Yes.
sometimes there's a price to pay. There's a price that comes with taking a risk.
Yes.
And I think that if I had to tell, at 50, if I had to tell myself something at 18, I would say to take more risks, to
Mm.
explore more of the world. Um,
Yes.
I moved away from Indiana when I was 18 to go to college. And with the exception of very short periods of time, I never lived in Indianapolis again. And although I did travel early on in my career, a substantial amount, I think that I would tell 18-year-old Kenya to travel more,
Mm.
particularly internationally. I think living in different cultures outside of the United States gives us a completely different worldview, and we begin to
Absolutely.
understand that we particularly as women, as African American women, we can thrive in a number of
Yes.
different settings. We have a lot to offer, we have a lot to share, and we have a lot to learn. um,
Yes.
and it's
Absolutely.
and that would be my piece of advice for my younger self.
I love that. So before we wrap up, I again want to just mention Church of the Common Ground. Reverend Kenya, can you again, just for our listeners, share with them your meeting times and how they can get more information about you all?
Yes. So we meet on Sundays at 1 p.m. in Woodruff, Park. We say rain, sleet, or snow, no hurricanes or lightning. And I guess we'll add for last Sunday, no ice storms, real life potential. But we also meet during the week. We meet on Mondays and Wednesdays at Central Outreach Center on Washington Street for morning prayer, starting at 10 o'clock, and we wrap up at 11:30. We also meet on Tuesdays for our non-medical foot clinic, and we take care of people's feet. We have a lot of good conversation, a lot of good hot chocolate and cocoa, and we meet at St. John, the Wonder Workers Church, which is across the street from Grant Park, and we meet there from 10 to about 12:30. And on Wednesday afternoons at 2:30, we meet in Woodruff Park for Bible study. And so
Excellent.
if there's anyone out there listening who would like to get more involved, please, you can email me, Vicar, Vicar, at churchofthecommonground.org, or you can go to our website, and my email address is also listed on that as well. There are plenty of ways for folks to get involved. We love bringing people. We love having people with us to worship and just to be with our community. We have some real
Love
talkers.
that.
And so,
Yeah. Yes.
we really, like I said, we invite folks to reach out to us, and we can plug you in. You can just drop in for a visit. But there are a number of ways that you can assist us with some of the emotional, the spiritual needs of people, as well as the physical needs. And those are listed as
Yes.
well on our website in terms of supplies. And there's a link to our Amazon wish list.
That's wonderful. One last thing, we really didn't talk about this, but if there are young women who are interested in going into ministry, or being a part of the Episcopal Church in some way, are there resources or people that they can talk to learn more?
Mhm. Well, I think that if they are currently, right, if they are currently worshiping at an Episcopal church,
Yes.
they would want to start with a priest at their church and sort of express that interest. Every year
Yes.
within the Diocese of Atlanta, I'm on the Commission on Ministry. We have a particular day where we invite people in who are
Hmm.
interested in pursuing ministry, but you have to
Wonderful.
go through your church first. Just
Yes.
in general, if there's a young one that's interested, they can always email me directly, and I can be happy to point them in the right direction.
Wonderful. That's great. I want to thank you so much again for your time. This has been amazing. And I kind of want to leave with a quote that I found on Facebook. And a friend of mine actually shared it. Lenora Tibbs shared this, and I think it's really relevant for the time that we're in. It says, if your heart is broken and your soul is deeply heavy in these days, that means you haven't lost your humanity. Even though it is painful holding on to our humanity, it's what is urgently needed right now. Don't allow cynicism or the cruelty we are witnessing take that away from you. Love all the more fiercely. I love that because in times such as these, we need the helpers. Going back to Mr. Rogers. And I want to thank you, Reverend Kenya, for being a helper, for being part of those who have the courage to be in the trenches with people who have the most need. It's really cold outside, y'all, and a lot of our neighbors are outside. And we really need to love on them in any way that we can. So thank you to Church of the Common Ground. Thank you to Gateway Center, Rebecca's Tent, Zabin Parity Center, and so many other organizations that love on our neighbors in need. You all have a great weekend, and as I always end, gotta run.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Kenya.